Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Heidi here. Today, I wore my funnest top that I could find for the least fun topic that I think I've tackled yet, which is ENFPs and breakups. This is one that I have gotten requested quite a few times. And I also know that when I wrote the ENFP survival guide, there's a section on relationships that included breakups, and a lot of people found that helpful. So I figured it was worth making a video about. I have gone through some just terrible breakups in my life where I did not have the proper coping tools, the proper level of self-awareness to navigate them with empathy for both myself and the other person. And it got messy a lot of the time. And I really empathize with any ENFP who is going through that, or any person who is going through that, because relationships are very difficult and very emotional things, and having a relationship end is honestly one of the hardest things that I think human beings have to go through. It is, I won't get started on the rant too early, but it is so unnatural. Like, breakups are just this completely unnatural concept we invented where it's like, pick one person, okay, and bond the hardest with them out of anyone in the entire world, and then suddenly cut it off and never talk to them again. And then you're supposed to like hate them and have negative feelings towards them, according to like the media. And it's just complete and utter bullshit. Like, breakups are bullshit. So that's where I'm starting from in this video, is that I think the way we structure breakups is absurd, okay? And that there are not many healthy models out there for dealing with them and for dealing with the very real, very visceral emotions that come up through the process of a breakup. And so I want to encourage everyone to listen to your gut a little bit more, a lot actually, when you're going through a breakup or the ending of any other meaningful relationship in your life, because it does not help us to just downplay these emotions that we have, downplay the bond that we have with someone else, and tell ourselves that now it's supposed to mean nothing. Of course, it doesn't mean nothing, right? There's so much that you have probably taken and learned and grown through in that relationship, good or bad. Even if the relationship was a terrible one, there are probably a lot of lessons you can take out of it. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about in this video is just learning to slow the process down instead of thinking that you have to do what everyone is telling you to do immediately after a breakup. Figure out your own pace, your own process, what works for you, because that's going to be what helps you actually gain the emotional coping skills to move forward in a more meaningful way. This is probably a very tender and very raw part of your life that you're going through if you're going through a breakup. So honor that and be present with that and allow yourself to feel whatever you need to feel so that later you don't have to feel it in a completely messed up way in, let's say, your next relationship. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. So I decided to structure this video. I don't know why. This is just what my brain told me to do when I was sitting down to write it. Through a series of do's and don'ts. And again, use your own inner wisdom and your own inner guidance here, but I wanted to lay down some kind of common traps that I feel like ENFPs can get stuck in after relationships end, and just talk about how to navigate those traps in a more healthy way. Disclaimer time. So, a lot of how we deal with relationships, and particularly a lot of how we deal with relationships ending, is actually, in my opinion, a lot more related to attachment style than to personality typology in the Myers-Briggs system. So I think that ENFPs will have some similarities, some common traps that they fall into that, let's say, an ISTJ might not struggle with quite as much, but I think that you really have to factor in things like your attachment style, things like your past experiences, things like, I don't know, even your Enneagram type or your past traumas, or just anything that is in your psyche influencing the way that you think about yourself as a social and emotional creature. Those things are going to come out screaming as soon as you are in a little tiny bit of a raw, vulnerable emotional place. And breakups tend to be a very large, raw and vulnerable and emotional space. So keep in mind that Myers-Briggs is very far from the only system that is going to influence the way that you approach breakups and move through them. But because it's the system that we talk the most about on here, besides attachment style, and I will absolutely in the future do a series on breakups and attachment styles, it's just gonna be a lot longer. We will, for today, keep things in the realm of Myers-Briggs and talk about some of the things that ENFPs might do while they're going through a breakup and which things we should probably be aware of. Just have like some yield signs in our brains around to make sure that we don't end up in a worse spot than we need to end up in when we're already navigating a really difficult period of our lives. So without further ado, pun not intended. I'm not a very big pun person, despite the fact that people often attribute liking puns to any, I don't think it's true. I think NISE users are the ones who like puns because it's like a double meaning, which is their whole thing, you know, like playing on words and being clever. And we're clever in like a more overt way. Anyway, without further ado, let's talk about the do's and don'ts of breaking up as an ENFP. Number one don't, and I've already touched on this a little bit because I could not contain myself, but don't feel like you have to adhere to every social norm that is set out for breakups, okay? There are so many kind of FE style norms out there about A, the way you're supposed to feel after a breakup, and B, the way that you're supposed to handle those feelings. And if you so happen to feel the exact way that everyone tells you you're supposed to feel after a breakup, cool, whatever, run with that, kudos. But if it so happens that your feelings are very fluid, very convoluted, very confusing, I want to take a second and assure you that that is completely freaking normal. Okay? It is very normal when you've had a humongously significant relationship with someone to not feel totally chill about like never talking to them again right away, right? That is quite literally a deep attachment wound that I think it is bizarre we expect people to just cleanly move on from. Like this idea that we're supposed to take a week or so and cry and be upset and maybe be angry at our partner and then move on and never feel anything about it ever again is insane. If anyone figures out a strategy for actually doing that, please just come on my channel and tell everyone else how it's done, because I have never figured it out personally. Every time I have gone through a breakup in my life, I have absolutely continued to love that person for a long time after we broke up. And we will get into this. There has to be healthy boundaries around expressing those feelings because a breakup has happened. But telling yourself you shouldn't be feeling something that is very raw and present and intense for you is not the way to stop feeling it. It's just the way to create a whole bunch of internal judgment, internal tension, internal struggle. And it keeps you from doing the actual work of processing the grief around the fact that you still feel a lot of different ways towards someone who maybe isn't a part of your life anymore. But the worst possible thing you can do with all of those emotions is tell yourself that you shouldn't be feeling them, that you have to stop feeling them, that there should be a time limit on what you feel and for how long. And again, this doesn't mean that you don't work with those emotions, that you don't maybe seek out the help of a therapist or a friend or someone who can help you work through them if you're really feeling stuck on them. But I really have seen this tendency in ENFPs to kind of downplay their emotions, almost like gaslight themselves a little bit about how strongly they felt and how strongly they might still feel when they're going through a breakup, because they think that there is a sense of shame that should be associated with still feeling something for someone who's not in their life anymore. And maybe that person isn't in your life anymore for a valid reason. The first serious relationship I ever had to end because some genuinely shady shit was going down. And for a long time, I thought that meant that the only emotion it was acceptable for me to feel was anger. But I didn't just feel anger. I felt intense pain and grief over the person that I thought that person was, right? I felt intense rejection. I felt intense moments of just wanting to call that person and bring them back into my life and just have selective memory for the rest of my life. And if I had not allowed myself to move through every single one of those difficult and longing emotions in a real way, it would have kept me stuck on them forever. Because that's what happens when we don't move through our true feelings and we try to deny them, right? They stay present for us and they come out in weird neurotic ways. So number one is don't feel like you have to have your emotions happening on a specific timeline that maybe works for other people, right? Recognize whatever is coming up for you when it's coming up for you, allow it into your psyche, allow yourself permission to feel it, even if it's not what you think you should be feeling, and give it the honor that it truly deserves. Give the relationship you had the honor that it truly deserves, right? Just because someone stops being right for us, just because a relationship stops fitting in our lives, doesn't mean that having had it was not an incredible thing, right? Something that we can be extraordinarily grateful for. So don't feel like you have to downplay and dismiss your own relationships or your own feelings about them ending. They mattered. And it hurts so much because it was so significant in your life, right? So you owe it to yourself to give yourself the time and space to process that in whatever way it feels right for you to process it. Now, the counterpoint to this, do be respectful of the other person's grieving process. So I have seen a lot of cases, and I have been the perpetrator in a lot of cases, of ENFPs leaving a relationship and then just waffling like crazy and being like, no, wait, maybe I want back in. No, wait, maybe I want out. And this can also be related to like fearful avoidant attachment. It can be related to a lot of different things, but allowing yourself to feel whatever you're feeling does not mean giving yourself permission to act in any way that you feel inclined on the whim of a moment to act, okay? So feeling grief over your relationship ending does not mean going back to the person you just broke up with and being like, just kidding, I changed my mind, and then changing your mind again 2 days later when all of a sudden you feel resentment, right? We do not have to act on every feeling that we feel. We just have to give ourselves permission to feel them with healthy boundaries around our acting. So don't bring the other person or other people involved into your emotional experience in an unhealthy way that's going to change their emotional experience for the worse, right? We have to find ways to process our emotions without putting those emotions on other people, particularly the people that we just broke up with, okay? So honor the moving on process of the other person. And often if this person is an FE user, they might have a slightly more linear, a slightly more traditional moving on process than you have. And that might really fucking hurt, right? It fucking hurts to see our ex-partners move on before we do or before we're ready to. But we have to allow other people the grace to heal on their own timeline, and we have to give ourselves the grace to heal on our own, right? Live and let live is what FI naturally does pretty well when we give ourselves permission to. The second don't that I would recommend watching out for if you are an ENFP is don't move on without understanding what went wrong in the first place. It can be so tempting, particularly if you're insecurely attached, to jump out of a relationship and immediately find something else to occupy all of your mental space. So whether that is another relationship, whether that is career, whether that is just throwing yourself into a cause or project, yes, that can be healthy. There can be a certain level of healthy distraction that allows you to move through your emotions with some positive feelings thrown into the mix. But if we are trying to simply barrel forward without processing what went wrong, and what was unhealthy about our past relationships, and what would be an obstacle in the future if we were to re-enter a different relationship, it's like we are throwing away the opportunity to learn this humongous lesson and to take so much out of the experience that we shared with someone else and to internalize it and to grow wiser and stronger and more resilient through the experience. When we avoid our inner world at times like this, it's like showing up to a university class and putting your headphones in, right? There is so much information that is available to you at times like this. And if we are electing to tune it out and to not look at it or pay attention to it, we are literally just stunting our growth as human beings, okay? It hurts to look at what went wrong. It hurts to look at what we could have done better. It hurts to sit with the grief and the pain of having lost something. But that pain, that grief, that hurt can be our greatest teacher. It can bring us to some of the most extraordinary lessons that we will ever learn in our lives if we just refuse to give ourselves permission to immediately jump into the next thing that feels tempting or looks exciting, right? There will always be exciting things to engage with in the world. There will always be new opportunities, new people, new things that come along that light us up in life. But after a really painful experience has happened is not necessarily the time to completely throw yourself into something new, right? Don't move on without learning the lessons that you needed to learn from the experience you went through. You are missing out on one of the most meaningful parts of your life if you do that. Now, that being said, the counterpoint to this is do stay open to what's coming in the future. So I find that a lot of ENFPs tend to be kind of polarized in these areas. So one ENFP will immediately throw themselves into the next project, the next relationship, the next whatever, and then the one next to them will stay real stuck when they go through a breakup or the end of a relationship, and they will ruminate endlessly on their pain and what went wrong. And it's important to note that that is not healthy lesson learning, right? If we're just ruminating and turning things over in our heads and not really learning anything meaningful, that's the point where maybe we need to see a counselor, we need to work with someone who can help us extract the lessons from what we've gone through. So don't ruminate over the past at the expense of staying open and fluid and responsive to your present. Do allow yourself some joy. Do allow yourself to form new relationships with people. Do allow your life to move forward. Just don't do it at the expense of learning the lessons that you need to learn, right? Life is always and will always be this fine balance of holding on and letting go, and learning when to do each is going to be one of the most important lessons that any of us learn. Don't number 3, and this relates a little bit to those who might be more prone towards rumination, is don't assume that no one else could possibly understand what you're going through, okay? I have been so guilty of this one at every point in my life. Every time I've ever gone through a breakup in my life, I have felt like a deep sense of shame that I feel anything at all about the relationship. That might be like an Enneagram or a trauma thing, I don't know. But I also have this very deep sense of no one could possibly understand what I'm feeling. No one has ever felt the way that I feel. No one could possibly understand my unique situation and the unique relationship that I have with this other person. So I'm just going to not bother trying to explain to other people what I'm feeling, not bother letting people in on what I'm going through, not bother being honest about what I'm actually feeling. And instead, I would just kind of say the things that I thought you were supposed to say after a breakup and act like I was already over it and already moved on and already happy and on to something else. But in reality, it was never that clean cut. I have never in my life had a breakup where I just felt fine after. That's not how people work. That's not how attachment works. When we lose something that matters to us, it hurts and it sucks and it's hard to go through. And no, nobody is going to understand exactly 100% every nuance of how you feel, but you have to give them a chance. You have to show up and try to share yourself with the people in your life. Try to explain honestly where you're at and what you're going through, even if it doesn't fit the traditional norm of what you're supposed to be feeling after a breakup. Other people often understand a lot more than you think they do. Other people might even be relieved to kind of hear what you're going through because they've been through it too. They've felt a lot of the emotions that you think only you are feeling or have ever felt. They just also thought they couldn't share that or couldn't say it out loud. Being the person who is willing to go first with emotional honesty opens up the door for these incredibly fulfilling and honest relationships that we could have in our lives. But someone has to be willing to be honest first, okay? And if you can allow that to be you, especially at a point where you're going through something really difficult that feels very specific and unique in its pain, those are the moments that can bring you closer to other people than anything else. So don't think that no one else could possibly understand what you're going through. Give people some credit. Give people some credit in their willingness to try if they don't understand what you're going through, and to want to listen and be there and understand as best they can. Now, that being said, do recognize that the relationship you had with this other person who you've broken up with was completely unique. No two people anywhere else in the world will ever have that exact relationship again. And that is what makes human relationships of any sort, whether they're romantic, platonic, family relationships, so special. It is always this divine meeting of two people who have completely unique things to share with each other. And God, that's cool. It's really cool that you got to share that with someone. I remember the last time I left a really serious relationship, I was listening to All Too Well by Taylor Swift, like years later, like a long time later, because I really delayed processing that one. And there's this line at the end where she goes, "It was rare, I was there, I remember it." And I just remember picking up on the word rare and thinking that is such a wonderful term to apply to a past relationship, because especially if you are insecurely attached, and especially if you are on the anxious spectrum, so either anxious or fearful avoidantly attached, there is this inherent worldview that tells you that love is very scarce. So if you leave a relationship, you're never going to find someone who loves you like that ever again. If you find one person who wants to be with you, you have to like hold on to them for dear life. And that sense of scarcity keeps a lot of people trapped in relationships that aren't working. That sense of scarcity makes us panic when relationships end because we think, oh my God, I'm never going to find something like this ever again. But I think the healthy flip side of the word scarce is the word rare. Rare implies that, yeah, this was special. This specific thing is never going to happen again. It's rare, but that's different than scarce. The experience of love will happen again for you, absolutely, if you want it to. It absolutely will. But what you had with another person is always rare because the agreement to come together and share yourself deeply with another human being in a loving romantic relationship is a rare experience. We don't go through that so many times in our lives in a very real and vulnerable and raw way. And it's okay to really honor the fact that, yeah, this isn't an everyday thing. It requires an emotional burial service in your own mind, you know? It merits you spending some time appreciating it. And that can be a really, really healthy thing to do, even if it didn't end so well. Very like, thank you next vibes, you know? But take the next and like push it a little bit down the road, because the whole moving on right away thing we already covered. All right, next one. So the do and don't that I just gave was directed a little bit more towards anxiously attached spectrum types. Avoidantly attached spectrum types might struggle more with this one, which is don't detach from your feelings by projecting them, okay? And what I mean by that is often when we have trouble accessing our own emotions, we can only really access them by seeing them in other people. So let's say you go through a breakup, you kind of feel like weird in that you don't feel a lot at all. You feel fine about it. Maybe you feel relieved that the pressure's off, but maybe you suddenly feel these very intense feelings about other people going through tough situations. Or you might feel very guilty or very much like, oh, I bet the person I just broke up with is suffering a lot and I feel a lot of pain about that. And recognize that for what it is, which is a projection that you are feeling something very strongly, but you're having trouble feeling it for yourself. So you have to feel it for someone else or towards someone else. And this could be towards your ex-partner, towards a friend you know who's going through a breakup, towards a movie character who's going through something difficult. I actually don't know for sure that this is more of an avoidant thing. It might just be a person thing. But if you're feeling strong emotions come up elsewhere in inappropriate situations, don't let that go, okay? Don't just kind of go, that's weird, and shrug it off. Recognize that as your own emotional experience coming up in what feels like a safer way for your brain. So I remember one time, like way in the past, I was cheated on and I didn't feel, I mean, I definitely felt some negative stuff about it, mostly anger, but I never felt like sad about it. And then I had a friend like years later who was cheated on, and I felt the most overwhelming sadness for this friend. And it was not even a close friend. Like I didn't even like send them a Facebook message. Like that was how not close of a friendship it was. But I just felt this like extreme crushing sense of pain for them. And I realized like, shit, this is the pain I could never feel for myself. Because I had so many judgments about myself, so many feelings of like, oh, maybe I deserved this to happen because I was all deep in my own attachment wounding, right? And I was able to feel it for this other person because I believed that they were not deserving of something bad happening to them. And it took me a long time to recognize what that pain was a projection of my own emotion onto someone who it felt safer to process it through. So the do and the don't are kind of tied up here. The don't is don't project all of your emotions and tell yourself you feel nothing. Spend some time with yourself and get to know your own emotions. But the do is notice when you are projecting. If you feel an inappropriately strong emotion in any situation, it's almost always a projection of something deeper, right? And this is a very common experience if you go through something like a breakup, which is traumatic to your attachment system. One of your defense mechanisms might be detaching from that emotion, might be avoiding your inner world while the worst of it is going on, right? And if that's the case, you might start to notice inappropriate emotions cropping up in other scenarios because those emotions have to get out somehow, right? They're gonna look for other routes out. So just be aware of that. Note when you're feeling an emotion that doesn't seem like it's quite right for that situation or doesn't seem quite fitting to that situation, and take that as a cue from your own mind that it wants to process. It's feeling more ready to move through that emotional experience now. And that's a good thing. And again, you need to create a space for yourself where you are physically and emotionally safe enough to move through those difficult emotions. And step one is just recognizing them for what they are when they come up, even through seemingly ridiculous experiences. Okay, last don't, and this is one that anyone who's ever been in the grip of their inferior SI after a breakup or who has been in an FI-SI loop will understand a little bit more. But generally, ENFPs and INFPs both tend to fall into this trap quite often after a difficult experience, and it is don't idealize the past. So when the future does not work out for us as NFPs, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. You're always rolling the dice. That's how life is. But I think a lot of the time, NFPs leaving relationships, ENFPs in particular, will get this feeling of like, I'm going to make the future so amazing. I'm going to do all of this stuff that I couldn't do in my relationship. And then if that does not work out, if that future plan does not pan out the exact way you thought it would, there is a very intense temptation to return to the past and idealize the relationship that you once had, kind of gloss over everything that went wrong and convince yourself that if you can just get that relationship back, get it back to the place that it was once in, maybe like 3 years ago when you were in a honeymoon phase or something ridiculous like that, then everything will be okay forever. And here's the thing. There is nothing wrong with recognizing that a lot of things were great about relationships that we've had, right? We should be taking lessons out of them. We should be reflecting on the past and realizing what we've learned and how we've grown alongside another person. That is so important and so healthy. But if we are ignoring everything that went wrong and idealizing the past, what we're actually doing in that situation is refusing to let ourselves grieve. Idealization is a really, really great grief avoidance tactic, right? If we're denying the actual pain that we had to go through because a situation necessitated us moving through that pain because the alternative was more chronically painful, right? Leaving a relationship hurts. Staying in a bad relationship hurts chronically. If we don't give credit to and grieve that chronic sense of pain that we were experiencing, we're going to want to just go right back into it. And a lot of us do. For most of my early life, I was the biggest perpetrator of on and off again relationships. I would get out, idealize the past, go back, remember everything that was wrong, get back out, idealize the past. It is a terrible cycle. It is just emotional purgatory for both people involved. So give yourself the gift here of grieving the past, of recognizing there was some awesome stuff in that relationship. And any relationship probably has some good stuff to look back on, right? Even if it didn't end well, there was a reason you stepped into that relationship in the first place. There was a reason you wanted to be there for whatever length of time you were there. And you're gonna have to acknowledge that, feel the pain of wanting to go back to it. It will happen at some point. And also recognize there's a reason why I can't. There is a reason why I left. There's a reason why that wasn't working out. And I can't stay stuck in these idealizations of it at the expense of my own future growth, right? 1 foot on the gas, 1 foot on the brake. Until we learn to look at the past realistically and acknowledge relationships for what they were, both good and bad, and not try to shove them solely into one category or the other, we're going to stay stuck in this indecisive, emotionally ambiguous cycle. The antidote to emotional ambiguity is emotional self-awareness, understanding and giving credit to everything that we felt, while also understanding what we need going forward that is different. And that is, at the end of the day, the only thing that ever truly brings us closure when something really meaningful has ended, is understanding the why and the what next and accepting that it's going to be hard. Something being for the best in the long run doesn't make it easy to move through in the short run. And so all of these do's and don'ts, all of these traps that we might fall into really come down to the same thing, which is just acceptance. Acceptance that something at one point was right for us and maybe now it's not anymore. Accepting that we're going to feel a lot of different things, some of which might really confuse us as we're moving through them, and that we have to have patience for ourselves in that process. Accepting that breakups are a really difficult and bizarre part of being alive, and that we need a lot of patience with ourselves as we navigate them. And that is the number one do I have throughout this entire process, is just be patient with yourself, accept wherever you're at every point in this process, and allow yourself to move through it with an authentic awareness of what it means for you, without worrying what it looks like to anyone else, what anyone else thinks you should be feeling or doing, okay? This is your life. These are your emotions. Give yourself the gift of moving through them in a very real way. You will thank yourself immensely down the line. Okay, I think that is all for today. I procrastinated this video. It's been requested a lot of times, but no one likes thinking about breakups. It's not a fun thing to go through, so my heart humongously goes out to you if this is something that you're going through right now. I hope you are being super gentle and super understanding with yourself as you go through it. I love you all so much. Hope you are loving on yourselves as well, and I will see you back here sometime soon.